Is $4.37 enough for my mom's surgery? 6-year-old Leo stood on his toes, his small hands pushing a pile of coins across the cold hospital reception desk. The doctor looked down, her professional resolve already forming the word no. But in the waiting room, a billionaire watched, and he was about to discover that this child's desperate question was the key to a medical debt crisis affecting 100 million Americans. This is Leo Hayes. His mother, a home health aide named Maria, needs a spinal fusion she cannot afford. Her story is not unique. Across America, 100 million people are drowning in over $200 billion of medical debt. They are forced to make impossible choices between health and survival. For Leo, the choice was to empty his piggy bank and hope. But in a system designed to exhaust hope, what happens when a single moment of desperate courage is witnessed by the one man with the power to change everything? Maria Hayes worked 60-hour weeks as a home health aide. For 8 years, she bathed, fed, and lifted patients who had no one else, building a life for her and Leo in a small apartment where the rent was always due before the paycheck felt solid. She had no savings. Like 40% of American adults, a single unexpected bill would break her. That bill arrived on a Tuesday morning. She was helping Mr. Evans, a patient with advanced Parkinson's, transfer from his bed to a chair. The hydraulic lift, a piece of equipment flagged in the facility's logbook 3 separate times over 7 months, shuddered and gave way. Mr. Evans began to fall. Maria caught him, taking the full force of the impact across her lower back. She heard the pop before she felt the white-hot lightning shoot down her legs. She crumpled to the floor, holding Mr. Evans safely against her, even as she couldn't stand herself. The diagnosis was grim: 2 herniated discs compressing critical nerves. The treatment was clear: a spinal fusion surgery followed by months of rehabilitation. The cost, even with her meager insurance, was over $200,000. Her employer placed her on unpaid medical leave. Then the denial letter from the workers' compensation insurer arrived. The reason? An alleged pre-existing condition. The medical records Maria had kept since she was 18, which showed a perfectly healthy spine, proved this was a lie. But the system wasn't designed for truth. It was designed for attrition. Studies show insurance companies deny between 10 and 20% of all in-network claims. They bank on the fact that most people, especially those in pain and without income, will simply give up. Maria didn't give up. She fought. She filled out appeals from her bed, her handwriting shaky from pain medication she couldn't consistently afford. She organized bills in a shoebox on the kitchen table, a mounting pile that reached $9,000, then $15,000. Each envelope felt heavier than the last. Leo watched. At 6, he understood more than he should. He saw his mother's face tighten when she thought he wasn't looking. He heard the whispered phone calls with the billing department, the quiet, desperate pleas. He saw the dinners get smaller. His world, once secure in the rhythm of his mother's love and work, was fracturing, and he had a plan. In his room was a blue ceramic piggy bank, filled with the treasure of a childhood: quarters from tooth fairies, pennies found on sidewalks, a crumpled $5 bill from his last birthday. He was sure it was a fortune. The morning of the appointment with a new specialist, a last-chance consult Maria had begged for, Leo put on his father's old army jacket, the sleeves swallowing his hands. He didn't have a father. The man had left years ago, a ghost in a family photo. The jacket was Leo's armor. He carefully emptied the piggy bank into a small drawstring bag. The total was $4.37. In the hospital waiting room, Maria sat stiffly, her face pale. Leo clutched the bag. When the receptionist called their name, something in him snapped into resolve. He marched ahead of his mother to the high counter. He had to stand on his very toes. With both hands, he poured the coins out in a clattering cascade. The receptionist, a woman named Linda who had seen every kind of tragedy, stared. The doctor, Dr. Evans, who had just finished explaining the surgical necessity and the 5-figure down payment required, looked down from her charts. Leo's voice was clear, braver than he felt. "Is this enough for my mom's surgery?" Dr. Evans sighed, a sound of professional exhaustion. "Honey, no, I'm sorry, this isn't how it works. You need to talk to the financial office." It was a kind rejection, but a rejection all the same. Her focus was already shifting to the next chart. Leo's shoulders slumped. The fierce light in his eyes dimmed to confusion. This was all the money in the world. Why wasn't it enough? But here, what the doctor missed. Seated 15 feet away, partially obscured by a large potted fern, was a man named Arthur Vance. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than Maria's annual rent. He was a billionaire, though he hated the word, who had built a fortune in medical technology. He was in the waiting room that day for his own reasons. A silent, private grief involving a wife lost to a medical error years prior. He came to public hospitals sometimes. He told his assistant to remember what real stakes looked like. He saw the whole scene. The boy's determination, the heartbreaking specificity of the coins, the mother's shame as she gently pulled her son back. He saw the system, his system, the vast, profitable machine of healthcare, reduce a human crisis to a transaction a child couldn't possibly understand. And in that moment, Arthur Vance didn't see a charity case. He saw a failure, a catastrophic, systemic failure he had profited from for decades. As Maria guided a confused Leo away from the counter, Arthur stood up. He walked over not to the counter but directly to Maria and Leo. His voice was calm, cutting through the hum of the waiting room. "Excuse me, my name is Arthur Vance. I couldn't help but overhear." Maria instinctively pulled Leo closer, her posture defensive. She met men in suits before, from the insurance company, from the hospital billing department. Their language was always polite, their outcomes always cruel. Arthur crouched, bringing himself to Leo's eye level. He ignored the coins on the counter. "That was a very brave thing you did for your mom." Leo just stared, his fingers clutching the empty drawstring bag. Arthur then looked at Maria. "The lift, at the Fairview facility, the one that failed." It wasn't a question. Maria's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because my company, Vance MedTech, sold Fairview that model of lift 7 years ago," Arthur said, his voice low. "And because I recognize a cover-up when I see one. The denial reason they gave you is fraudulent." He handed her a simple business card, just a name and a number. "You have a strong case, and you shouldn't have to fight it alone. Let me help." Maria was silent for a long moment, warring with a lifetime of learned self-reliance. "Why? Why would you help us?" Arthur's gaze drifted to Leo, then back to her. "Let's just say I owe a debt, and your son just presented me with the bill." He didn't write a check. He didn't make a grand promise. He made a phone call. Within an hour, Maria Hayes had an appointment the next morning with the top workers' compensation attorney in the state, a woman named Simone Rivera whose success rate was the stuff of legend in legal circles. Arthur's driver took Maria and Leo home. That evening, a courier delivered a week's worth of groceries to their apartment. No note, just food. Simone Rivera was a force of nature. In her sleek downtown office, she listened to Maria's story, her eyes sharp behind stylish glasses. She reviewed the denial letters, the accident report. "This is textbook bad faith," Simone said, tapping the insurance company's letter. "Pre-existing condition with no prior medical history to support it. They're betting you'll fade away." Then she asked the question Maria had been afraid to voice. "Can you get the maintenance logs for the lift from Fairview?" This was the pivot. The heart of the case wasn't just Maria's injury, it was the preventable cause of it. But Fairview, like many facilities, guarded such records fiercely, fearing liability. Maria had no legal power to demand them. Arthur Vance, however, did. Or rather, his network did. Arthur didn't call the facility. He called a former board member, who called the current administrator. The message was clear: produce the logs or face a discovery process in a lawsuit that would be backed by virtually unlimited resources. The logs arrived via encrypted email to Simone's office within 48 hours. They told a damning story, page after page of digital entries. The lift serial number matching the one in Maria's accident report had logged 3 separate mechanical fault alerts over 7 months. Each alert was acknowledged by facility maintenance, and each one was closed with the same note, addressed, no parts available, monitor. It had never been repaired. It had never been taken out of service. Simone leaned back in her chair. This isn't just a denied claim, Maria. This is gross negligence. This is a direct violation of OSHA protocols. This changes everything. She could now sue not only the workers' compensation insurance carrier for bad faith, but also the Fairview facility for direct liability. The potential settlement value multiplied exponentially. But the system fights back. When the insurance carrier's legal team got wind of Arthur Vance's involvement and the obtained maintenance logs, their strategy shifted. They didn't fold. They attacked. Maria received a new letter. This one accused her of frivolous litigation and attempted fraud by association, suggesting she was manipulating a wealthy donor to exploit the system. The letter stated that continued external interference could result in the permanent nullification of her claim. The threat worked exactly as intended. Maria, sitting at her kitchen table, felt the old fear constrict her chest. She called Arthur, her voice trembling. "They're saying you're making it worse, that they'll shut it down forever because of me." Arthur's response was immediate and ice cold. "That letter is a weapon. Its only purpose is to scare you into firing me and firing Simone. It means we're winning." He had Simone file a counter-motion the same day, alleging intimidation of a claimant. The legal battle was now a very public, very messy war. And Arthur was changing. The man who once sat in hospital waiting rooms as a form of private penance was now fully, furiously engaged. He spent nights in his home office, walls covered in timelines linking Maria's case to broader industry data. He discovered something staggering. The specific lift model that failed had a known design flaw in a hydraulic seal. His own company had identified it internally 4 years prior. A technical bulletin had been issued, but it was labeled non-critical, and the upgrade was offered as a costly service contract. Many facilities, including Fairview, had declined it. The weight of this nearly buckled him. His company's profit calculus, prioritizing upsells over safety upgrades, had directly contributed to the machine that broke Maria Hayes's back. The debt he felt was no longer abstract. It was horrifically specific. He drove to Maria's apartment one evening unannounced. He found her helping Leo with homework. He told her everything. About the design flaw, the bulletin, the failed safety culture he now saw he had helped create. "I am so sorry, Maria. This is my fault." Maria listened. She didn't offer absolution. She asked a practical question. How many other lifts like that are still out there? Arthur didn't know, but he vowed to find out. His mission was no longer just about one surgery. It was about a recall. It was about accountability. With this new ammunition, Simone went on the offensive. She leaked the existence of the maintenance logs and the known design flaw to an investigative health reporter. Not the full documents, just enough to signal the nuclear scale of the coming lawsuit. The insurance carrier, now facing potential public relations catastrophe alongside legal defeat, sent a new offer. It was a settlement, $150,000, a full release of all claims, and a confidentiality clause so strict it would prevent Maria from ever speaking about the case. It was life-changing money. It would cover the surgery and leave a cushion. Maria stared at the number. For a moment, she saw a future without fear. Then she thought of the other Marias, the other aides, the nurses, the orderlies, the people still using those lifts. She thought of Leo's $4.37, a symbol of how little the powerful thought her fight was worth. She pushed the offer back across the table to Simone. "No, we go public. We go to trial if we have to. I want the surgery covered, I want my lost wages, and I want them to issue a formal notice to every facility that bought that lift. And I won't be silent." When Arthur heard this, he did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled. Maria Hayes wasn't just a victim to be saved. She was an ally, a partner. the moral core he had lost, he called the head of his board. Initiate a voluntary recall and retrofit program for the LX200 model, full cost to the company. No arguments. The board pushed back. The cost would be in the tens of millions. The liability admission could spawn other lawsuits. Arthur's reply was final. Then spawn them, and we will settle every single one. We are doing this. Two fronts were now blazing: the brutal inch-by-inch legal war for Maria's future and the unprecedented corporate campaign to fix a past mistake. Arthur's fortune was the fuel for both, but the most unexpected battle was just beginning, a deeply personal one. Reporters, having caught the scent of a billionaire versus insurance Goliath story, began digging into Arthur's past. They found the obituary for his wife, Eleanor. She hadn't just died of an illness. She had died from a hospital-acquired infection after a routine procedure, a victim of a different kind of systemic failure. The narrative spun publicly. Reclusive billionaire's crusade born from personal tragedy. Arthur hated it. His private grief was now a public talking point, but it also galvanized public opinion. Maria was no longer a faceless statistic. She was the human link between two tragedies, proof that the system failed the rich and the poor alike, just in different ways. The pressure achieved what lawsuits alone could not. Facing a public relations nightmare and the sudden, massive liability of the Vance MedTech recall announcement, the insurance carrier collapsed. They agreed to all of Maria's terms: full coverage of the spinal fusion and rehabilitation, payment of all back wages, plus a substantial additional settlement. No confidentiality clause, and they would issue a joint safety advisory with Vance MedTech. Maria Hayes had won. The surgery was scheduled. But as Arthur stood with Maria and Leo outside the hospital the day the papers were signed, he felt no triumph. He felt urgency, because he knew the real battle, the war against the quiet, crushing machinery of medical debt, was just beginning, and he had just enlisted for life. The surgery was a success, but the battle was just beginning. Maria woke up from anesthesia to a new kind of pain, the sharp, clean pain of healing. But outside her hospital room, the world she had challenged was mobilizing. The Joint Safety Advisory was released, but with a crucial, buried clause. It stated the lift failures were due to improper maintenance, subtly shifting blame onto facilities like Fairview and away from the design flaw. Arthur was furious. It was a masterclass in corporate deflection. Then the counterattack came, not from the insurance company, but from the political arena. A state senator, whose campaign was heavily funded by the insurance industry, introduced a bill dubbed the Lawsuit Abuse Protection Act. Its provisions would cap pain and suffering damages in workers' compensation cases and make it harder to sue equipment manufacturers directly. The bill was aimed squarely at preventing cases like Maria's from ever reaching a courtroom again. Simone Rivera called it the Maria Hayes Prevention Act. Arthur saw it for what it was: a systemic immune response, trying to wall off the infection of accountability before it could spread. He had the resources to fight in the courts, but could he fight in the state legislature? He tried. He funded a grassroots advocacy group to lobby against the bill. He ran ads featuring Maria's story. But the opposition had decades of experience and deeper pockets. The bill advanced out of committee. Then, a new blow. A conservative news outlet published an exposé on Arthur. It framed his entire crusade as a hypocritical publicity stunt, pointing out that Vance MedTech's stock price had dipped only slightly after the recall announcement, and that Arthur's personal wealth had actually grown due to other investments. The headline read, "Billionaire's Guilt, a Costly PR Campaign." The article included a devastating detail. It named Leo. It published a grainy photo of him leaving school. It questioned whether a child should be used as a prop in a political battle. Maria, now home and struggling through physical therapy, read the article and felt a cold fear that had nothing to do with her spine. She called Arthur, her voice shaking with a new kind of anger. "You promised to protect us. They have my son's picture." Arthur was silent for a long moment. He had underestimated the ruthlessness of the opposition. "I will fix this," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. He hired private security for Maria's apartment. He had his legal team send cease and desist letters, but the damage was done. The narrative was now about a billionaire's ego, not a broken system. Public sympathy began to waver. Then the worst moment. Leo's school called. There had been an incident. Another child, repeating something he'd heard at home, had taunted Leo. "Your mom is a liar and your rich friend is a fake." Leo, who had borne so much with quiet strength, had pushed the boy. He was suspended for 3 days. Maria sat at her kitchen table, the suspension notice in one hand, her pain medication in the other. This was the cost. Her son was becoming a target. The victory of the settlement felt like ash. She wondered if she had been wrong to fight so publicly, to accept Arthur's help. Had she traded her family's peace for principle? Arthur arrived that evening. He saw the defeat in Maria's eyes, the confusion in Leo's. He had come to offer an update on the lobbying effort, but the words died in his throat. He had started this to absolve his own guilt, to fix a single wrong. Instead, he had unleashed a torrent of new harm onto the very people he wanted to save. For the first time, Arthur Vance, the man who could move markets, felt powerless. But in that moment of shared despair, Maria did something unexpected. She didn't ask him to leave. She didn't blame him. She pointed to the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Arthur. We need a better plan." They talked for hours. The old strategy, using Arthur's wealth as a battering ram, was failing because it was easy to caricature. They needed a strategy that couldn't be dismissed as one rich man's whim. They needed to build something that belonged to the community. Maria, drawing on 8 years of advocating for patients, had an idea. "We don't just tell my story. We collect 1,000 stories. We build an army they can't ignore." That night, the Vance Hayes Medical Debt Advocacy Project was born. Its mission was simple: provide legal and financial navigation for families drowning in medical debt, but also aggregate their stories into a powerful, undeniable database of systemic failure. They would partner with existing community clinics, legal aid societies, and churches. Maria would be its public face, but its power would come from the chorus of voices. They launched quietly. Simon Rivera agreed to head the legal arm. Arthur funded it, but the press releases emphasized Maria's leadership and the coalition of grassroots organizations. They didn't lobby against the bill directly. They inundated the senator's office with personal testimonies from families in his own district. They held town halls in church basements where Maria would speak, then listen for hours. The political calculus began to shift. The senator's office was flooded with calls from voters, not lobbyists. The Lawsuit Abuse Protection Act was suddenly a political liability. It was tabled indefinitely. This was the second pivot, from defense to offense. The project's first major victory was helping a family of 4 whose father had died of a heart attack, leaving behind $200,000 in hospital bills. They got the debt forgiven, then another, and another. Each victory was a story. Each story was a brick in a new foundation. But the system had one more card to play. The original workers' compensation insurance carrier, stung by their very public loss, filed a motion to reclaim Maria's settlement, arguing that Arthur's involvement and the subsequent publicity constituted a fraudulent procurement of funds. It was a vicious, desperate move, designed to drag Maria back into court for years and drain the project's resources. Simone was prepared. She countersued for malicious prosecution. The legal battle threatened to become a black hole, consuming time, money, and energy. Arthur was ready to spend millions fighting it. Maria, however, saw a different path. She asked for a meeting with the insurance company's CEO. The meeting was held in a neutral law office. Maria, still using a cane, walked in with Arthur and Simone. She faced the CEO, a man named Richard Thorpe, and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a list of the first 100 families the Vance Hayes project had helped. "You can spend the next 3 years and millions of dollars trying to take my surgery money back," Maria said, her voice calm. Or you can write a check to this project for the same amount and join us in fixing the problem your industry created. Your choice. Thorpe was stunned. It was a bluff of breathtaking audacity, but he was also a pragmatist. The lawsuit was a loser in the court of public opinion. Cutting a check could be spun as corporate responsibility. After a week of silence, his lawyers called. They would drop the motion to reclaim the settlement. They would not join the project, but they would make a one-time, no-strings-attached donation of $200,000. It was a surrender, a quiet, strategic surrender. The project now had not just a story, but a scalp. Their credibility was unassailable. On the one-year anniversary of the day Leo emptied his piggy bank, Arthur stood with Maria on the steps of the state capitol. Behind them were 100 people, each holding a sign with a number, the amount of medical debt the project had helped abolish. The total was over $10 million. They were announcing the introduction of a new bill, the Medical Debt Relief Act, which would expand charity care requirements and cap interest on medical debt. As Maria addressed the crowd, her voice strong and clear, Arthur looked at Leo, who was holding a sign that read 4.37. The boy wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at his mother, his expression one of pure, uncomplicated pride. In that moment, Arthur understood the transition that had occurred. He had not rescued this family. They had rescued him. They had given his wealth a purpose, his grief a direction, and his life a second act. The war wasn't over. The system was vast and entrenched. But as the crowd cheered, Arthur Vance knew that the most powerful weapon wasn't his money, or Maria's story, or even the new law they were proposing. It was the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to look away, and the even more radical act of choosing to see each other as allies in the fight. The Medical Debt Relief Act did not pass, not that year. In the gritty reality of politics, landmark bills rarely do on the first try, but something more important happened. It didn't die. It became a rallying point. The coalition Maria and Arthur had built, nurses' unions, patient advocacy groups, religious organizations, kept the pressure alive. They turned the bill into a litmus test for candidates. 2 years after that Capitol Steps rally, a modified version, the Patient Financial Protection Act, was signed into law. It capped interest on medical debt and required hospitals to screen patients for financial assistance before sending bills to collections. It was a start, a real, tangible crack in the fortress. The Vance Hayes Project, now simply called the Harbor, grew beyond anyone's imagination. From a single office, it expanded to 12 cities. It didn't just fight individual debt. It trained a new generation of patient advocates, often hearing people whose own families had been helped. Maria Hayes, once a home health aide struggling to stand, became its executive director. Her salary was paid by the foundation Arthur had permanently endowed, but her authority was earned in every church basement and town hall she had ever spoken in. Arthur did not return to the sidelines. He stepped down as CEO of Vance MedTech, retaining only his chair on the board to oversee the ongoing safety reforms. His full-time work became the Harbor. He was often found in the office late, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a partner, crunching numbers with the finance team, listening to case managers. The cavernous silence of his mansion was replaced by the chaotic, purposeful noise of a movement. He started having dinner at Maria and Leo's apartment every Thursday. It was not charity, it was family. Leo grew up in the heart of this story. The boy who once asked if $4.37 was enough became a teenager who understood systems, policy, and power. For a 7th-grade science fair, he didn't build a volcano. He built an interactive map tracing medical debt hotspots against hospital profit margins in their state. He won first prize. Arthur framed the ribbon and hung it in the Harbor's lobby. 5 years after the day at the hospital counter, Maria stood without a cane. She completed a 5K charity walk, her pace slow but steady, Arthur and Leo walking beside her. The physical scars remained, a latticework on her lower back, but the pain was a memory, not a prison. She returned to work not as an aide but as a trainer, teaching new caregivers about patient rights and equipment safety protocols. Her first lesson always included the maintenance logs from the lift that injured her. The project's database, now containing over 50,000 anonymized stories, became a powerful research tool. Economists and public health experts used it to publish studies proving the direct link between medical debt and declines in community health. This data became the ammunition for new legislative fights in other states. The model was replicating. Then came the final surprising detail. On the 10-year anniversary of the harbor, at a gala celebrating the abolition of $100 million of medical debt, a young man approached the podium. He was a law student, bright-eyed and determined. He asked to say a few words. He introduced himself as David Evans. The room didn't recognize the name. Then he said, "My grandfather was Mr. Evans. The patient Maria Hayes was transferring when she was injured." A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. David continued, his voice thick with emotion. "My family never knew the full story. We knew Pop had a close call. We never knew a woman sacrificed her health to save him, or that she spent years fighting for the care she needed because of it. I only learned her name when I interned at a legal aid clinic and saw her picture on the harbor's website. I am here tonight to thank Maria Hayes for saving my grandfather and for building something that saved my friend's mother last year." He then turned to Arthur. "And Mr. Vance, your recall of those lifts. One of them was in my grandfather's new facility. It was replaced 2 months before he needed a transfer. You probably saved his life too." It was a moment of profound, circular closure. The single act of care that had sparked this entire chain reaction had rippled out and, a decade later, returned to protect the very person who had been at its center. The room erupted in tears and applause. After the gala, Arthur, Maria, and Leo, now a young man with his mother's steady eyes, stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Leo spoke, his voice no longer that of a child but thoughtful, measured. "Do you think it's enough, what we've done?" Arthur looked at the city lights, each one a household, a story, a potential crisis. "No," he said honestly. "It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something, and something is always better than nothing." Maria smiled, leaning on the railing. "He used to ask if $4.37 was enough," she said, nodding to Leo. "It wasn't, but it was something, and that something started everything." The story of Leo, Maria, and Arthur is not a fairy tale. It did not end medical debt. It did not fix a broken system, but it proved that the system is not a monolith. It is a collection of choices. The choice of a child to offer everything he had. The choice of a stranger not to look away. The choice of a wounded woman to fight not just for herself, but for everyone behind her. And the choice of a powerful man to use his power not for more profit, but for repair. Their legacy is not just in the laws passed or the debts erased. It is in the demonstration that our greatest power lies in the decision to see each other's humanity and to act on it. The machine of injustice is vast and cold, but it is no match for the persistent, collective warmth of human connection and courage. As the lights of the city twinkled below, a new chapter was already beginning, ready to be written by the next person who chooses to see, to stay, and to help. So what is the price of a miracle? For Leo Hayes, it was $4.37. Not because that money was enough, but because it represented everything he had. And in offering it, he set in motion a truth we often forget. Our most vulnerable moments contain the seeds of our greatest strength. This story is not just about medical debt, though 100 million Americans carry that burden. It is not just about a faulty machine, though those exist in every industry. It is about the spaces in between, the gap where systems fail and human beings are left to fall. And it is about who chooses to stand in that gap. Maria, Arthur, and Leo taught us that change does not begin with a blueprint. It begins with a choice. A choice to ask a question that has no good answer. A choice to listen when it would be easier to walk away. A choice to fight not just for your own healing, but for the healing of the system itself. They were not extraordinary people. They were ordinary people who found themselves in an extraordinary circumstance and refused to be defined by despair. The machine of injustice is impersonal. It works because it counts on our silence, our exhaustion, our belief that we are alone. The most revolutionary act is to prove it wrong, to see someone, to really see them, and then to do something about it. This is the lesson that echoes from a hospital waiting room to a state capitol, from a child's piggy bank to a billion-dollar foundation. No one is powerless. Your attention is a form of currency. Your empathy is a tool. Your story, or your willingness to listen to another's, is a weapon against indifference. Maybe you will never empty a piggy bank on a reception desk. Maybe you will never fund a recall or lead a movement. But you will encounter a moment where you can look away or you can look closer. You can choose convenience or you can choose connection. In that split second, you hold the same power Leo held, the same power Arthur wielded, the same power Maria channeled. The power to change a life, including potentially your own. If this story resonated with you, consider what it awakens in your own life. Has there been a moment when a small act of kindness redirected your path? Do you see a crack in the system around you where you might stand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We believe every story has the power to inspire another. For more narratives that explore the profound impact of human courage and compassion, subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button if this message mattered to you, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is always a valid choice. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of a community that believes in looking closer and doing better. Remember, the world is changed not by giants, but by the steady, collective push of ordinary people choosing to be there for one another. We'll see you in the next story.